Good evening, and welcome to the 7 o'clock Thursday, August 28th, 2014 meeting of the Planning and Zoning Commission. The first item this evening is the Pledge of Allegiance. Jordan, can you lead us in that, please?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. The second item on our agenda this evening is the approval of the minutes from the August 14th, 2014 Planning and Zoning Committee meeting. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second. That's Mr. Emmons that made the motion. Mr. Bragnano seconded it. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? There are none. The third item on our agenda this evening is an item on consent, the Trans-Ocean Commercial Development Request for Administrative Permit Use for an approval for an outdoor storage area. Do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
That's
Second.
That's Mr. Bragnano and Mr. Day.
Mr. Chairman, since this item is on consent, you might want to give the audience an opportunity to be heard if anyone wants to be heard on the matter.
Does anyone wish to be heard on this matter? We had a motion to approve and a second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Seeing as how there are none, we'll move on to item number 4. Item number 4 is a public hearing. It's Harmony Reserve's request to rezone approximately 122.06 acres from RS3 to a plan to development and to obtain conceptual PD plan approval for a residential project to be known as Harmony Reserve. I'm going to begin by asking, if any of the fellow commissioners have had any ex parte communications, please speak up now. I have spoken to staff, specifically Mr. Bowling, earlier today about this project. Anyone else?
I have not.
Okay. Seeing as there are no more, I think I'll turn it over to staff. Why don't you introduce us to this project?
Thank you, Chairman Zimmerman. I'm John McCoy with the planning staff. And first of all, I'd like to note that this item was continued from the August 14th Planning and Zoning Commission continued public hearing. I'd like to let the residents know that came to that meeting and came forward that I appreciate them returning. And
if you could swear the witnesses quickly, please. Anyone that's going to testify.
Want to do that now?
Yes, that'd be
okay. Anyone that's going to testify on this, seeing as how it's quasi-judicial, including members of the audience, correct?
That's correct.
Please stand now so that you can be sworn in.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
so thank you, and I do appreciate the residents coming out on the 14th and coming out tonight. And I have talked to a number of people about this. It is a noticed item. And most of the comments have been along the lines of concerns related to traffic. And along those lines, we did receive 2 letters, one from the Sanctuary Board of Directors related to traffic improvements at 58th and 37th, namely a signal. I did give a copy of those letters to the recording secretary and to the attorney, since this is a quasi-judicial matter. Just wanted to let that go on the record that we did receive those. And with that, I will start my presentation. This is a PD rezoning, and it's a rezoning because the applicant's proposal is slightly greater than 3 units per acre. And right now, the project is zoned for 3 units per acre, but the land use would allow more. Process-wise, PD special exception, PD rezoning are very similar. There's 2 public hearings. This is the first one tonight. It's a public hearing by the Planning and Zoning Commission. The Planning and Zoning Commission hears about the project, takes testimony, and then makes a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. The Board of County Commissioners makes the final determination. If approved, it goes forward through the development process. This is a slide of the subject site showing the immediate area. And what I'd like to point out on this slide is generally the subject site is zoned RS3. Much of the adjacent surrounding area, immediate surrounding area, is zoned RS3. North of 37th Street, zoned RS3. There are two enclave properties I'd like to point out. One of those is zoned RS3 and one is split zoned RM6 and RS3. The property does, all the adjacent, or all of this property has an underlying L2 land use, which allows up to 6 units per acre. So the RM6 residential multifamily isn't allowed zoning. To the west, the sanctuary and the property to the north are zoned RS3. The sanctuary is RS3, but it is also a planned development. To the south, you can kind of see in the corner a PD zoning, which is Woodfield. And then as you come across the south side of 33rd Street, all of the properties are zoned RS3. You see Shadowbrook in the southeast corner of the project zoned RS3. And then when you cross Kings Highway, the properties are zoned RS6 residential single family up to 6 units per acre. And then as you go a little further east, you see the municipal boundary with the city of Vero Beach. The next slide is an overall sort of big picture land use slide, and it ranges boundary-wise on the north from 41st Street to the south to 26th Street, on the west at 66th Avenue, on east at 43rd Avenue. This line is 43rd Avenue, and this shows you the underlying land use, which is L2, this tan area. The L2 allows for up to 6 units per acre, be it a RS residential single family designation or an RM6 residential multifamily. And the reason I put this slide in here is to show generally the bigger picture transition. So you get down towards the mall, this RC is regional commercial, is the mall. This is a land use area, is up to 8 units per acre, and there's some multifamily zoning around the mall. As you go north, this is Woodfield, residential area surrounding Woodfield. This is the Trillium project on the west side of 66th Avenue. And then as you come north, on the north side of 33rd Street, west of 66, you're outside the urban service area in this AG1. So right at this boundary is the boundary of the urban service area, 1 unit per 5 acres. So you transition from west to east, going towards the city, and then you transition really from the mall to the area up on 41st Street. This M2 is up to 10 units per acre. So there's some areas along 41st Street that are in the 10 unit per acre. And then again, once you hit 58th Avenue, it transitions to a 6 units per acre, 3 units per acre, 1 unit per 5 acres. And that's the reason. And again, you see the Harmony Reserve site outlined in red. This is a not quite same scale area, but still gives you kind of a broad overview of the area. And it does show the physical features and the surrounding uses in the area. Again, this is the sanctuary immediately adjacent to the west. This is Shadowbrook adjacent to the south and east, 58th Avenue, the residential development on the north side. You can see the sort of the low intensity residential development on the north side of 37th Street. And then a little bit of a similar pattern on the south side of 33rd Street with some conventional single-family subdivisions, and Woodfield as you get further west, again Trillium at the southwest corner of 33rd Street and 58th Avenue. And one of the features to point out is right now 33rd Street does not go through to the east, and that property is in the city of Vero Beach. As far as a project description, it is roughly 122 acres, 301 single-family homes, 96 multifamily homes, a clubhouse, recreation facilities. It's a 55-plus community, and the density is roughly 3.62 units per acre, and that's a general project description. This is the project layout on this slide. And the things I'd like to point out is when you have a PD rezoning, you actually have a binding conceptual plan, and this is the binding conceptual plan, a version of it on this slide. And with the layout, it intersperses single-family lots between a 50-foot wide and a 65-foot wide single-family lots, and then some multifamily villas interior. So there are alternating, or not alternating, but a mix of 55 and 65-foot wide lots, and that's allowed through the plan development process. Through the plan development process, there are the ability to get waivers. And again, I'll point out the enclave parcels in this slide are right here. There's a reserve area that wraps around 37th Street, 33rd, and 58th Avenue on the east. The waivers through the PD process are reduced lot size. The 50-foot wide lots, the area's been reduced to 6,200 square feet, and for the 65-foot wide lots, reduced to 8,000 square feet. There are reduced front setbacks. The 13-foot setback applies to porches and applies to side-loaded garages. The 20-foot setback actually applies to the living area, and that's, say, consistent with our RS6 setback for single-family homes. And then the 25-foot setback applies to front entry garages. So a front entry garage would actually be recessed behind, at least 5 feet behind the living area, or up to 5 feet behind the living area. The side setbacks are also reduced, so you'd have a 5-foot side yard for the 50-foot wide lots and a 7.5-foot side yard setback for the 65-foot wide lots. The building coverage has been increased to 36%, and the lot coverage has been increased to 80%. This is a project aerial that shows an aerial overlay on the subject site. Again, 37th Street's on the north, 33rd Street on the south, the enclave parcels, 58th Avenue on the east. And it shows the physical features, so you can see that the site is fairly well vegetated. You can see the sanctuary again to the west, Shadowbrook to the south and east, the residential development on the north and south sides of 33rd and 37th Street. This is a color rendering of the site, and I put this in for two reasons. One, it has an illustration of what the recreation amenities could look like, and hasn't been a design approved for the recreation amenities, but this shows you where they would be and gives you an idea about what they could be. And it also shows the location of the wetlands mitigation fairly well, and it illustrates that very well. And that's right along 33rd Street at the project entry where the actual on-site wetlands mitigation will occur. Traffic circulation, and this is, like I said, where I've probably received most of my comments from the public, is in relation to traffic circulation. The site will have 2 gated access points. It'll have a gated access point on 33rd Street and a gated access point on 37th Street. The 33rd Street will be built in the first phase, and it will be served by a westbound right turn lane with the initial phase construction. I want to talk a little bit about 37th Street access point. In talking to the developer, he proposes to construct that in the initial phase for use as a construction access point early on. And then it may also serve as an emergency access and essentially become operational to residential traffic in the 3rd phase. And then the 4th phase is when it's slated for the turn lane. And again, that's what the condition, and that's what this text is explaining. There's an eastbound left turn lane on 37th as part of the improvements. And it has a monitoring condition where it can be reevaluated at that 4th phase to see if the traffic is indeed meets the warrants for that particular. The county Public Works Department has reviewed and approved a traffic impact statement, and that's the basis for these required improvements. Other than these 2 turn lanes, there are no off-site traffic-related improvements required as a result of the approved traffic impact study. This slide shows the phasing. First phase is in blue, and you can read the number of lots and residential units. What I would like to point out is it does include the entry, includes the wetland mitigation, includes stormwater tracks on either side of the recreation, also includes the recreation tracks. So the recreation improvements are slated to start in the first phase, and also includes some of the villas. The second phase is in orange, and it's largely residential in nature, as far as it has one stormwater pond in it but primarily residential. In white is the third phase, again, stormwater improvements, but also the connection at that point to 37th Street become operational for residential traffic, and the area on the west side of the enclaves, and then in yellow, phase 4, primarily residential, and the area on the east side of the enclaves. As far as dedications and improvements with the proposed plan development, there's an additional 20 feet of right-of-way that's being dedicated for 33rd Street, 40 feet of additional right-of-way for 58th Avenue. The applicant does need to release a Murphy Act easement along 37th Street that will impact some of the residential lots, and release a portion along 58th Avenue that isn't subject to that ultimate right-of-way of 40 feet. There's a 5-foot sidewalk required along 58th Avenue for the project frontage, and 8-foot along 33rd for the project front, and sidewalks along both sides of all the internal streets. There's additional drainage capacity to be built into the stormwater internal for potential 58th Avenue improvements and 33rd Street improvements. The applicant needs to complete the community clubhouse and pool prior to a certificate of completion for phase 2, and that's so that the resident or the recreational improvements keep pace with the residential development. The enclave parcels I've been talking about are part of a plat, an older plat called Albrecht Acres, and the majority of Albrecht Acres will be replatted by this Harmony Preserve. And through that replatting process, we want to make sure that any rights for those 2 enclave parcels are preserved. And again, that'll be a condition of approval and evaluated when that final plat comes through at that point in time. Also, one of our standard conditions for plan development rezonings is a reverter. If no construction starts within 7 years, the subject site would revert to the RS3 zoning district, and that's just to make sure it returns to a standard zoning district and a standard entitlement, so somebody doesn't have to go back through the public hearing process, just essentially return it to what it was or what it is now. As far as environmental items, the site is subject to the native upland set aside. As I showed you, it's a heavily wooded site. There are some wetlands, some areas of nuisance exotics, but by and large, it's a wooded site. The site does meet the 15% native upland set aside, and I've given you the figures there. There are a little over 16 acres of wetlands on the site. The wetlands are of fairly low quality. The applicant will be impacting pretty much all of the wetlands and mitigating on-site for 2.86 acres, and then mitigating off-site for the remainder. Also, as a result of the environmental study, there are gopher tortoises possible and possible use by wading birds on the site, and that'll go through the proper environmental permitting, and we will need to address those either with a clearance letter from the agencies that gopher tortoises are not on the site, or get a relocation permit if they are on the site. The buffering plan, big picture buffering plan, the entire site is to be ringed with a type B buffer, 6-foot opaque feature. That feature will physically vary. For the majority of the perimeter, it will be some combination of preservation of the existing vegetation with nuisance exotics removed, and then supplemented with native vegetation to achieve the type B buffer standards with a 6-foot opaque feature. There are some areas where it necks down to the standard 25-foot type B buffer. That's along a small portion of 33rd Street, portion of 37th Street, and 1 or 2 of the internal buffers. Those will be a more formal planted buffer and may include a berm. The buffer along the west perimeter is 55 feet minimum along the sanctuary, a little bit wider along the west side. As I go on, I'll show you sections, and this is the intent for those buffer sections, is basically preserve all the existing native vegetation, non-nuisance vegetation, remove the nuisance vegetation, and then supplement with native vegetation. Architectural design. In your staff report, there's a lot more detail on the architectural design as far as graphics provided. This is just one excerpt to give everybody kind of a feel about the graphics or the architecturals that are provided. And also there's more details on the plan development waivers in your packet. As far as architectural design, there's a provision in the plan development chapter of our code. Essentially, it's an anti-monotony provision trying to make sure that there is architectural variation, design variation, so that projects are interesting and you're not just getting a repetitive design. And from what the applicants provided so far, it looks like they're right on target to certainly meet or exceed that provision. That'll continue to be monitored as it goes through at the preliminary PD level. And if they propose new building designs, it will continue to be monitored. One of the conditions from a compatibility standpoint is staff is recommending that none of the homes on the perimeter be two-story. The applicants indicated they're proposing all single-story. They don't have a problem with that condition, but I wanted to bring that out there as, again, as a compatibility measure that staff is proposing a condition that none of the perimeter homes be two-story. All PDs are required to provide public benefits, and these are a list of the public benefits provided by this. It does provide substantial open space along 33rd Street, 37th Street, and especially 58th Avenue. It provides the ultimate right-of-way for 2 thoroughfare plan roads, provides stormwater capacity for improvements to those roads, provides native uplands in excess of the LDR requirements, and provides enhanced perimeter buffers. With that, I would like to get the staff's recommendation, and staff does recommend that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommend that the Board of County Commissioners grant conceptual plan approval and approve the rezoning for Harmony Reserve with the conditions listed in the staff report. And again, those conditions deal with the dedications of the right-of-way, release of the Murphy Act, the buffering, the drainage, preservation and obtaining all the necessary environmental permits, turn lanes, the replatting condition and preserving the rights of the out parcels, the recreational facility, the one-story restriction on perimeter homes, the zoning reverter. And I didn't address this too much in this presentation, but the applicant is proposing this as essentially a 55-plus community. There is a registration requirement with the state. They will be required to register and essentially have it as a 55 and older community, and that does figure into the overall approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the way we'll do this is first we'll allow the commissioners to ask any questions they may have of staff, and then maybe I'll invite the applicant to come up and answer any questions and make his statement, and then we're going to have plenty of time for a public hearing, and everybody can come up and speak their mind, if that makes sense. So, do any of the commissioners have any questions?
I don't. Just the comment is we're looking at 3 standards. We're looking at consistency with the comp plan, concurrency, and compatibility, correct?
Correct. Those are 3 as far as measuring it. Again, it's a quasi-judicial, so there are those benchmarks as well as, yeah.
Any other questions anyone has?
Not at this time.
I have a question. When I look at page 4 of the staff report, where we're comparing the RS3, which is the current zoning, to the proposed PD, there are many variations. There are many variations, and which I'm prepared to accept may all be part of a good design. And then also, there's a variation in relation to how we count the number of trips per day. And there are other things, too. There are other things, too, that make this PD possible, which is the very nature of a PD. But would I be correct in saying that the reason that is the case is because this is a 55-plus community and there's a feeling that there's less of an impact, or there's good statistics to suggest that there's less of an impact on the rest of the community at this kind of density and with these kind of variations from the normal code for traffic and otherwise?
I think, for the record, Stan Boland, Community Development Director, I think that's one of the factors. I think it's a combination of factors in this case and in some other kinds of plan developments we've had. One is that as you get, usually with these types of designs where you have smaller lots, homes closer together, and in this case actual multifamily attached, multifamily attached tends to have a lower traffic trip rate than single family detached. So just the character of the unit itself and the way that it's laid out is one factor. But also, you're correct. If it's targeted and marketed and occupied by mostly 55-plus type of people, that is also a characteristic that has lower trip generation rates. So when you compare it to similar projects like that have the same type of design and tend to have 55-plus type of residents, such as Waterway Village or Woodfield, you get trip rates. And I would say also intensity based on trip rates of much less than conventional development, conventional single family.
Okay. Well, then there's just one clarification. I'm hoping either you can make for me or maybe the applicant can, because when I looked at the language in the staff report, the words that's used is an age-targeted 55 community, and when I just got on the internet and goofed around, which is a dangerous place to be, admittedly, there are two kinds of things. There's age restricted, which means by state law and by dint of federal fair housing law, it means that 80% of the community has to be 55 plus, roughly. That's roughly what the law says. And then there's age targeted, which is an active adult lifestyle, but there's really no restriction on who can live there. It's targeted towards a certain group, but anyone can buy in there. Which of these is it?
Well, from staff's perspective, we did not use the word restricted because we're not anticipating and we're not recommending that there actually be a restriction, a covenant on deeds, for instance, to restrict the age of persons here. What we were patterning our recommendation after was what's in federal law, what's I guess the terminology for housing for older persons. And the state program that John referenced that's in the condition is based upon that. And the criteria for that include at least 80% of the occupied units occupied by at least one person 55 years of age or older. And so that's why staff actually, I think, used the term targeted in its report because that's who, our understanding is that's who the project will be marketed to, and if they meet these state program requirements, they can market it as such. I think one of the reasons why it would, in staff's view, it would be difficult to have an age restriction of people must be of a certain age on the property. It would be difficult for us to independently verify that. Conceivably, if you had an age restriction, and I know it doesn't apply here, but if you had an age restriction about school-age children and you had that restriction, you could have some kind of independent verification or partial verification. If the school board could send us information, if there are no students at the public schools coming from that subdivision, that'd be a good indicator that that restriction is being observed. But we don't refer to it as age restricted because we're not recommending a restriction that would be difficult for us to verify.
But just to be clear, I want to be clear on. I want to understand this because what I pulled up is the Florida Commission on Human Relations. There's 55-plus housing requirements. It says, for a community to be considered housing for older persons as a 55-plus community, the housing must be intended and operated for occupancy by persons 55 or older and meet the following requirements. At least 80% of the occupied units are occupied by at least one person 55 years or older. The facility or community publishes and adheres to policies and procedures that demonstrate its intent and, in fact, be a provider of housing for older persons. And 3, the facility or community complies with rules established by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for verification of occupancy. So it's not really it's not a county thing anyway. It's a state designation regulated by federal law.
Correct.
So, and John McCoy with the Planning Department. In my conversations with the applicant, it's my understanding that they were going to take the approach of meeting that first criterion of having 80% 55 and older. I'll let them speak to that in more detail. And again, as you point out, it's not a local restriction. If any restriction occurs, it's going to be at that state level as participation in that program and the applicants here.
If I may, John.
Please do. Introduce yourself for the record, please.
Chuck Meckling, Insight Solution, owner's representative for the Harmony Project. And yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, you're absolutely correct. It is a age-restricted, 55 plus. Exactly what you read is what our application to the state will be. So that is exactly what we're doing.
So 80% or more of the people will be 50.
Exactly.
Thanks
Yes, sir.
very much. Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that. That's important to me. Thank you. Let me see if I had any more questions here. I think I did, and if you'll just stick with me here. I did have one technical question on the PD plan analysis on page 8, and I'm sure you're going to give me the right answer here. But the two notes regarding open space and recreation area both talk about the preservation areas counting towards each of them. We're not double counting there, are we?
No, we're not.
Okay. Next question is on page. This I didn't understand. I'm hoping you can just explain it to me. On page 4, the last bullet point, it says, also proposed as a reduction in the standard roadside planting area width from 6 to 4 feet. Tell me what that is. Where is that, and what's that going to be?
When you take a roadway section and you...
Are these the internal roads?
Internal roadway section,
Okay.
correct, with the sidewalks on either side. Essentially, there's an area between the back of curb and the edge of sidewalk. Typically, it's 6 feet wide. That's the planting width. And they're looking at reducing that and compressing that to a 4 foot wide grass strip between the sidewalk and say the back of curb.
And if I could just add to that, the reason staff does not have concerns about reducing it is because on the other side of the sidewalk is green yard area. So for root zones and so forth, there will be a substantial amount of green space close to and within the root zone of the trees themselves, but it'll be on the other side of the sidewalk.
Buffers are often important when we're talking about, different densities and things like that. And what I think I heard John say is that the 50-foot and 55-foot and 60-foot buffers, which are a nice width, they're not going to be bermed. Paint a picture for me. We're going to have the natural vegetation is going to be there, so the existing trees are going to remain. How are they going to achieve a type B buffer with how are we going to have a nice buffer for our neighbors who have been here for many years?
And that's what these sections are intended to illustrate. And again, it gives you sections at different places, a couple of along Shadow Brook, along the sanctuary. And normally in a type B buffer, the minimum width is 25 feet. So from 25, we've gone to 55 to greater in width. So we've doubled the width, and with a 25-foot width, you can get a berm in and plant on top of it, but it's a very formal type of planting plan. With this proposal, the proposal is to preserve all of the vegetation within this 55-foot width that is not nuisance exotic or not exotic, and then come back in and supplement to the degree necessary to meet that type B buffer and that 6 foot opaque feature. So you could be coming back in and planting 6 foot tall wax myrtles, planting cabbage palms, planting oak trees, and other native vegetation.
With irrigation?
Typically, for a native area, you might have some temporary irrigation for establishment, but the idea would be that you would not necessarily have a full-time irrigation. As you got to the edges, certainly you'd probably have irrigation spillover from the residential properties.
And in those buffers, initially the exotics are going to be removed, and then is there a program to periodically re-remove them, or?
There is a maintenance requirement, yes, within the code that they be maintained essentially exotics free.
And to follow up on that, once the buffers are established, there will be a conservation easement put over the buffers. There's a provision in the plat dedications that call for the maintenance of the easements, conservation easements, to be maintained by the homeowners association. And there are restrictions on what can and cannot be done. One of the things that can be done in those areas is the removal of exotics. So it would be an ongoing process.
Perfect. That's a good answer. Any other questions before we ask the applicant if they want to make a statement? No? So we'll invite the applicant or their representative up to tell us more about this.
Thank you. Good evening. We'll keep our presentation extremely brief because probably for time essence and the desire of folks to ask questions and have this vetted tonight, I'd like to first say that we've spent a lot of time looking at this, and Mr. Chairman, you're absolutely right. When we went through this process of looking at what our community needed or what was a desire, we looked at the FCHR, Florida Commission on Human Relations, and we are going to comply with that code that you had discussed earlier, and it is an 80%, one person in the household would need to be 55 or older, and that is age restricted, and it will be something that will be established with the state of Florida. We have to make reports to them in regards to the information within the community, so that's how that gets regulated. So there is a process that we go through with that. I'd like to first introduce our team, and many of these names you'll be very familiar with, but tonight Karen Meckling, she is also part of the Insight Solutions, and owner's representative is the Insight Solutions Group. Myself, Chuck Meckling, takes care of operations. Our civil engineer here tonight, Joda Biddle with Schulke, Biddle, and Stoddard. Our traffic engineer, Brian Good with Kimberly Horn. Environmental, Bill Kerr, BKI, Incorporated Consulting Ecologists. Our team, Robert Votaw, takes care of accounting and finance with OCCI Solutions. And our owner for Harmony Reserve LLC, J. Patrick Toby Hill, is here tonight as well. So our team is here to answer any of the concerns and questions. One of the things that we noticed as we were going through this process is there's a variety of needs. And as we have a variety of articles here, why do you want to sell to boomers? 77.8 million in the generation with an average of 10,000 turning 65 every day the next 19 years. 40% of those make over $75,000 a year. This is something that our county could utilize as far as a good tax base for this community. We can go through a wave of these informational situations, but it just basically goes through a variety of why these sort of communities have become very popular and in very much of a need. Woodfield, which is a community of this nature, has been a very popular community within this county and was an asset to the community. Vero Beach, beautiful community. We plan to develop in the style that people are accustomed to seeing here. We could go again through the location map, but we know where it is, and the staff did an excellent job of location. Again, we have taken the time to come up with concepts of these buffers for the community, not only for the privacy of the neighbors, but also for the reality that it creates a certain look and image, and that is something that we want to attest in this. One of the situations as we come into the community, we're going to have we're going to build a wetland habitat, an old Florida savanna feel and look. That's part of our wetland mitigation concept, and it'll be a very unique entry feature that hasn't been done before here in the county. So we're very excited about that. And we have an extensive clubhouse facility as well. The clubhouse becomes, in essence, like a town center type concept. It will have a variety of activities and functions that will take place within the community, and that gives you a list of some of the functions that will take place there. It will have a state-of-the-art fitness facility and a variety of programs along that line. The activities that the club will do for its residents is listed here as well, so it's a wide section of what these folks desire and look to be involved with. The club itself is over 14,000 square feet. And just to let you know, that club will be built on the front end of the project. When the model homes start, the club starts. So it'll be a major groundbreaking ceremony there, but it will be built on the front end. It's not going to be when the first 100 homes are done. So I think that we've all gone through some tough economic times and the questionable issue of amenities, when do they get built, things of that nature. So I wanted to let that be on the front end of when that gets started. Has a variety of activity rooms and functions within the facility. It has lounge. It has a game room. It has a fitness center, pool area, and a ballroom. It just contains all the elements that folks enjoy. And that's what we plan to produce, something of a quality project. Again, in keeping with that, the architectural elements, and we saw a little bit of it before, we have a very strong architectural book that has been submitted to the county. It's in accord to this. The garages are offset from the front. As you notice, they all have a very large front porch, and the orientation of the homes, again, is a little bit closer to the sidewalk area, much like what was done at Point West, and there's a strong interaction there between folks as they stroll in the evening. One of the comments I'd like to make is we decided to put in 5-foot wide sidewalks. That was the reasoning behind that, is when you stroll in the evening, it's on a 4-foot sidewalk, it's a little tight. We just felt like this is a simple amenity that really is going to go a long way for people to interact and get out in the evenings and enjoy themselves. Again, this is a representation of side-load garages as well, and there's a mix of both of these concepts. The villas are duplexes. There's only 2 that are put together. They're all internal to the project. None of those touch the exterior of the project at all. And that is basically our presentation. I'd be glad to answer any questions. I will say that through the life of this project, it will produce a little bit more than $1.5 million of transportation fees. And we all ask ourselves, where's the money come for road improvements? I have the honor of being able to sit on the MPO-CAC, so constantly I understand the need for road improvements and where does those funds come from. This is one of those avenues. It is from growth, and growth that can help take care of those needs as well. And I'll reserve anything else till later. Glad to answer any questions from the P&Z board.
I have a quick question for you, Chuck.
Yes,
you
sir.
said that you're going to do the community clubhouse with Phase 1. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So that's contrary to what it says in the staff report? Is that a mistake?
That is not. He's just advancing it beyond our condition, so he's certainly going to meet our condition. Our condition of completion is Phase 2, and he's the applicant saying he's going to complete it in Phase 1, so it will be in advance of our condition. So
Nothing wrong with being ahead of the curve.
Any other questions? I'm going to open up the public hearing. Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you.
Public hearing is now open, so the first person that would like to speak on this matter, please come up. Let me say this. This is my little speech I give every time. It's very simple. But I can tell you for all the commissioners up here, always, 100% of the time, the most persuasive argument is the one that is spoken in the most calm and respectful way with the best facts. Honestly, now you look like a calm and respectful crowd, so I'm not worried about a thing. But honestly, that's the truth. And I know you want, there you go. That's the one we have to look out for. But I know you want to be as persuasive as possible, so we're all friendly, and this is a friendly forum. So with that, I'm going to open the public part, and whoever would like to speak first, all you have to do is when you come up, just state your name and address for the record and speak your mind and keep it brief. Okay? Yes? No, you don't have to raise your hand. Just come on up.
I'm Andrea Moore. I live at 3394 63rd Square in the Sanctuary. I applaud the nature of the community. It sounds like a lovely place to live. I do have some concerns. I do think that it behooves the board to protect our lifestyle here in Indian River County, and I think by increasing the density of the population that is currently restricted, you would be going against that responsibility of yours. My concerns are, this is a little one maybe, he made mention of the tortoises and the storks. There are feral pigs in there, there are bobcats in there. These animals are going to go somewhere and going to require some kind of control, not to the pigs will totally trample the surrounding properties. That's one concern. I have a concern about mosquito and midge management on the wetlands. He talked about the stormwater control from the ponds. This gentleman here talked about the stormwater control with the 6 ponds. I was here during the hurricanes of 2004, and our lake, which is stormwater control, filled up. The water then went in an under-street culvert, under 33rd Street, to the canal on the other side, on the south side of 33rd Street, which then flows into the lagoon. The gateways to the lagoon, the floodgates, were closed to prevent a storm surge from flooding the whole barrier island. I have a concern that with almost 400 more units and no place for the water to go, where is this water going to go? The flooding is going to be exacerbated, and I think this needs to be considered. The water flow needs to be considered. And last, and certainly not least, is the traffic concern. I understand that when 58th Avenue is going to be widened, there's going to be a left turn lane northbound onto 33rd Street. I was under the impression that with the building of this development that eastbound on 33rd Street there was going to be a left turn lane into Harmony Preserve. He has only indicated a right turn lane westbound. If traffic from Oak Chase, from the back door of Woodfield, and from 66th Avenue and from the sanctuary are headed east on 33rd towards 58th Avenue, and a car is waiting for oncoming traffic to go into Harmony Preserve, it's going to back up. I think there needs to be a left turn lane eastbound on 33rd Street into Harmony Preserve. I also think that somehow, somewhere, I don't know where the land's going to come from, there needs to be a third lane, a left turn lane from 33rd onto 58th. Those of us who live around 33rd Street know that when we want to turn, even if we're turning right onto 58th and there is somebody waiting to turn left onto 58th, we're stopped behind them. We can't go around them. There's no place to go. And that's going to be exacerbated by almost 400 more cars. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Let me just one thing. If I get a chance to clarify something for you, and I think I can, with the help of the civil engineer from the project who is here, about the water. About the flooding. There are, and over the years there have been increasingly. I don't know when your development was created, but there have been increasingly more and more stringent requirements for retention on site for new developments. And what is it, a 25-year event, 50-year event, 100? What is it? It's a 25-year event that it needs. So that means statistically, once every 25 years, there would be a rain that would exceed the capacity, correct, of this type of thing, which is, that's a pretty wide margin. But the way they calculate that is much more than it used to be. So I don't know if that's gone some way to at least, maybe it hasn't answered your concern, but maybe by way of explanation. But I was interested to hear about your concerns about the traffic. Anybody else have any other questions of this applicant?
Can somebody clarify the 33rd Street traffic pattern?
Yeah, a couple of things besides hearing a planner talk about engineering things. I probably not the best thing, but I will say that the consultant, the traffic engineer for the applicant is here. They can speak to the traffic study, and our public works director and traffic engineering analyst are here to talk about the turn lane warrants and what kind of traffic the project is going to generate.
Good evening. Brian Good with Kimley Horn and Associates. The question regarding the northbound left turn lane on northbound on 58th Avenue at 33rd Street. Indian River County currently has it funded and planned in their 5-year CIP plan to construct northbound and southbound left turn lanes at 33rd and 37th Street. I believe those are funded for 2015, 2016? 2017 for construction. The comment regarding the eastbound left turn at the entrance to Harmony, that volume of turning movement that's projected with this community falls very short of the county's numerical warrant for the necessity for that improvement to be constructed. It's a very low volume. I would say it's probably around 9. I'd have to look in the report, but it's in the neighborhood of 9 to 15 trips in the peak hour, in the busiest hour of the day, in the afternoon, and that falls woefully short of the county's warrant requirements. The eastbound left turn at 33rd and 58th Avenue, again, it's not been demonstrated to be warranted associated with this project.
Come on up. Hello.
Hello,
How you doing?
George Glenn, resident at 2980 59th Avenue. I've lived on 59th Avenue, which exits onto 33rd Street about 100 yards from the southeast corner of the property in question for the past 30 years, and my family has lived on 33rd Street for about 60 years. I do apologize. I do have quite a few questions, and so I do apologize for the time this will take. I first want to say that I had a chance to meet with Mr. McLean for almost 2 hours yesterday. He was very generous with his time. I appreciated the enthusiasm and the amount of work they put towards this project. I'm also thankful that I've had opportunity to talk a couple of times with your Bill DeBrawl. He has been very helpful, and I've had quite a few, or at least a few emails to planning staff, and they've been very responsive, and I appreciate that. This particular piece of property is about 122 acres in size. It has over 100 acres of either native upland or wetlands, and I think there's probably not a whole lot of properties inside the urban service area boundary out in the unincorporated area of the county that has that type of makeup. And so it's a nice piece of property. It's in a great location and convenient for the developer. It does have a great future land use classification. I have some questions, and if it's okay, I'd like to ask their traffic consultant, Brian, if you don't mind, may I ask you some questions?
Pleasure.
I don't have your traffic study in front of me, but I read it a few times, so hopefully I remember enough of the details. The first, I guess, set of questions I want to ask about the trip generation rate. And I believe in staff's report, by narrowing it to this sort of 55 plus, you were able to reduce what would normally be a standard single-family unit trip generation by 40%, from 10 trips to 6 trips. Is that correct?
Yeah, the trip gen was a long process. When the project was presented to traffic engineering, the project was presented as what was discussed earlier as an age-restricted community. Age-restricted communities have a unique trip gen characteristic relative to a normal single-family home. If you think in terms of a normal single-family home, it's one trip in the peak hour in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. Age-restricted communities have 0.3 trips per unit in the peak hour. So just 1.3, it's a much less traffic generator. It's documented and studied by ITE, an industry standard for generating and documenting traffic characteristics. Indian River County, to the best of my knowledge, has never had a community proposed as being age restricted and used this reduced trip generation rate. The applicant agreed to study 2 like communities, one in Indian River County being Winfield and one being in Brevard, of a similar size, both of them being age restricted. Each community was studied on 3 separate days. On each day, 12 hours of data collection was performed. The data was collected came in within about 1 to 2% of the ITE projection, so it backed up and supported the reduced trip generation rate. This information was submitted to the county engineering and once again asked to be utilized in the traffic study. The county reviewed the information and felt that it wanted to take a more conservative stance and used a trip rate that had been previously used at Waterway Village, which was an approximately around 0.4 to 0.45 trips per unit. So it was above the age-restricted community, but had been a standard that the county had accepted elsewhere in the community. So that trip rate, that slightly elevated trip rate, was used in the performance of the traffic analysis.
And is that validated out in Waterway Village?
I can say that I personally have not collected data and studied it. I know that when that data was submitted, there was supporting data that was submitted to the county at that time with Waterway Village that supported the data.
But Waterway is not a 55-plus
It is not.
age-restricted community, right?
It is not.
Okay.
But again, the data and the trip generation standards that were used were and above of what would be an accepted
Understand.
age-restricted community.
Quick question about your Woodfield study. The main entrance into Woodfield is about 100 yards into the back entrance of the mall. Is the fact of the location of Woodfield being so close to the mall, would that have the effect of reducing the trip rate? The fact that if you know, so many people, if you're going to either Lowe's, Best Buy, Target, that you would avoid the road?
The way that, I mean, it's just, the communities are isolated in the sense that there's defined points of ingress and egress. Woodfield, as you know, has a single driveway to 26 and a driveway to 33rd. The way that data was collected was a video camera was put out and videotaped all incoming and exiting traffic from the community for those 3 days, for those 12-hour periods.
In what month was that conducted?
I would probably say March, April timeframe.
Okay, so you're confident it was within the season?
It was relative. I remember that the peak season factor was about a 1.02, which is virtually during peak season activity, so yes.
Okay, and I know we're using the traffic rate for Waterway Village. Waterway Village has an internal commercial component to it. I don't know if you've worked on it, but
I'm familiar with it.
Okay, it has an internal commercial component to it, does it not?
Within
Waterway Village.
Within the plan, it does, yes.
And would that also have the effect of reducing a traffic trip rate by the fact that?
I'm sure that when that data was submitted to the county, that was a component for consideration, was internal capture.
Let me make sure I understand something correctly. You didn't base it on Waterway Village. You based it on your own studies of similar 55-plus communities, but then that was less than what you're currently proposing, but the county wanted to be a little more conservative, and having previously gotten comfortable with Waterway Village, that's what they pointed
Yeah, I mean,
towards.
it comes down to a factor of safety. The county had not seen it. They felt uncomfortable with the trip rates because even with the actual data, it was so much less than a normal residential community. They wanted to take a more conservative position in using this data that had been utilized previously.
How much of your trip generation rate is premised on this notion that they're going to have all these activities, that it's going to be sort of this idea of a self-sufficient, you're going to have water aerobics, you're going to have cooking classes, you're going to have all these things. How much of that plays into the trip generation rate, that they're saying that they're going to do all these activities?
The driving factor is really the age restricted, the 80%, one resident has to be over 55. That's really the driving characteristics that's uniform to the communities that were studied by ITE. All the communities that were studied by ITE and the independent study that Kimley Horn performed had clubhouses and amenities for the residents. So relative to cooking classes and aerobics classes, I can't speak to that. I just know that facilities such as clubhouses existed within the properties.
Would there be a different rate if it was a 55-plus community that did not have a clubhouse with all these activities?
By ITE, no.
Okay.
It just they studied 24 different age-restricted, and it gave common characteristics of the properties.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I have questions about your traffic study relating to links and intersection studies. And I'm very non-knowledgeable of this, so I apologize if the questions are simple.
Well, I'll give you a simple answer.
I appreciate it. I do best with
I'm
simple
good at
answers.
simple answers.
I noticed when you studied various links that you included as far away as, correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, State Road 60 between 82nd Avenue and I-95. That's correct?
I'll take your, without going back to the report, I'll
Okay.
believe you.
That's even not important, but you went pretty far out there. The links that I'm actually really curious about were the links on 50th Avenue.
58th Avenue?
58th Avenue,
Okay.
the main street. Now, is everyone on the P&Z familiar with this road, everywhere from State Road 60 all the way to 45th? Is there anyone who's not familiar with how the road works, going from 4 lanes to 2 lanes, anything like that?
We're good.
Okay.
We're good.
You did a study, a trip study link for 16th to State Road 60
On 58th?
on 58.
The way that the links are identified, the county requires evaluation of roadway segments that we are assigning the greater of either 8 or 15 project trips to. So any linked segment that, based upon the trip generation and the distribution that the county reviewed and approved, that we assign traffic to, we have to evaluate.
Okay, sure. And so I'm just going to say what I remember, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. You had a study for the numbers from 16th Street to State Road 60. That's a half-mile stretch. That's south of State Road 60 on 58th. You included a half-mile link from 41st to 45th, in which you analyzed the impact and the capacity. You had an analysis of 45th to 49th. That's another half-mile link that you evaluated the impact and the capacity. And you also had a segment link from 49th to 65th or 67th. It's a 1.5 mile link, in which case you studied the impact and the capacity. So a bunch of these links that you studied were half-mile links, except for the link where the project actually is going, which is between 33rd and 37th, and that link was simply identified as State Road 60 to 41st. That's a 2-mile link. And so the question I have is, why would we only look at a 2-mile link where the project is and yet examine half-mile links further away, especially since there's no characteristics that are similar on this stretch of road between State Road 60 and 41st. You go from almost a 5-lane road between State Road 60 and 26, where you have huge commercial multifamily development. Then you transition from 26 to 33rd, where you go from 4 lanes to 2 lanes, and then from 33rd all the way to 47th is the various 2 lanes. So I just didn't understand why we looked at only a 2-mile link for that stretch.
That's a good question. The roadway segments that are evaluated in the beginning and terminal points are as defined by the traffic department in the concurrency tables. That's the link segment that the county defines and manages it from those 2 terminal points. So we're required to follow the patterns and definitions provided by the county.
Okay. I would eventually maybe like to ask Public Works why there's such a difference in the links around the specific area, because it seems to me that you would want to look at the specific half-mile link, or a series of half-mile links, to get a better idea of as far as what is the capacity, what is the impact.
Can I ask a question? So I'm not a traffic engineer, but I'm hoping to short-circuit this a little bit. Did you deviate in any meaningful way from the engineering science of traffic engineering or any of the rules of regulations of the county that govern that in making your determinations?
No, sir. The study was done consistent. We've had the privilege of conducting in excess of 500 traffic studies in Indian River County, and this study was done consistent with the land development regulations.
Mr. Moore, can you confirm whether that's correct or not? Did you get that for the record? That was Public Works Director Chris Mora. Does that satisfy you?
It does not. I would really like to know why there's a series of, when you're studying links to see what your capacity, what your use is, you're looking at half-mile stretches, and all of a sudden it says, well, we're going to use a 2-mile stretch for these completely different type of characteristics of the road. The fear I have, and maybe it's completely baseless, is that, well, if you're flunking a half-mile segment, you make the segment longer, and maybe all of a sudden you've now sort of borrowing capacity.
Just speak your fear directly to the engineer so that the Public Works Director can hear it, and let's hear their response rather than I don't want this to be a courtroom drama. I'd rather you just say, here's my concern directly, allow him to respond, and then we can ask Mr. Mora for further clarification if we want. If we need to go further than that, that's fine. But
I thought we were doing that.
I don't want to get too far down in the weeds.
No, that's fine. I think it's a
so do you want to ask him that question directly?
Well, I mean, he's right there. He can sit and he can explain why.
He had a question. What I understand is he had a question for you about whether you tried to stretch out a fail in what was it, a half a mile by stretching
Yeah,
it
the
out
link
into
the link is defined from 26 to 41st. Typically,
I think it's State Road 60 too.
the link is 26.
Okay.
Typically, the county has link segments defined by signals. There's a signal at 26. There's a signal at 41st. I would venture to say at a point in time in the future when 37th and 33rd Streets volumes reach to a point of requiring signalization.
Let me ask you, could you have done it any other way and met the county requirements?
The county wouldn't have accepted it any other way.
Okay, then that's the answer to the question.
Brian, it wouldn't
sir.
matter even if it was if it wasn't an age-restricted development.
No, it would have
Because you're still
if
within
this
that-
was a shopping center, it would be done the same way.
Okay.
He was meeting the county's requirements and doing it that way.
Right.
Okay.
And my point's not that they're trying. I don't think that the applicant has done anything at all to try to sneak around anything. I'm just trying to ask.
No, I know you're not trying to impugn his intentions. I'm just saying
That's
he
all
was,
right.
he
I'm
was meeting
impugned
the
all the time.
requirements. So let's move on and
Okay.
let's go straight to your skip the leading questions. Go straight to your concern. Let's hit him right on the head with it.
Well, I'll do my best. I also have a question. Have you had a chance to study this project? I mean, I think obviously you would to determine where the traffic would go, whether it's 33rd or 37th. So you're pretty familiar with how the development's laid out?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So does your traffic study show that most of the traffic comes out on 33rd, where the main entrance is?
The trip distribution is approximately 60% of the community is anticipated to utilize the 33rd Street driveway, and 40% is anticipated to use the 37th Street driveway connection.
Now, are we also, when we look at the property, would you say it's probably a true statement that 60% of the frontage would probably, if you look at the amount of frontage it has on 33rd versus 37th, that there's far superior frontage on 37th and 33rd?
There's greater frontage on 37th, but when you look at destinations, where trips are going to go, it's going to be south. When we studied Woodfield, 26th, 33rd, I'd venture to say that about 80 to 85% of the traffic came out to 26 because Publix and Walmart and Lowe's all are to the south of the community. I would fully anticipate it. Honestly, there's more frontage on 37th, and that's what's skewing a little bit more of the connectivity of 37th. But as far as destinations, it lies south of the property.
And it's true that most of the homes are on the 37th. If you were to draw a straight line between 33rd and 37th so that there's equal distance, that most of the homes are on the 37th
They're
side.
closer to 37th and 33rd.
So there's more land, more frontage, and more homes on 37th, and yet most of the traffic is going to go out 33rd, and that's also the main entrance, and that's also where the clubhouse was designed for the property. And is it also a true statement that 33rd, have you studied the traffic as far as the amount of traffic on 33rd versus 37th?
Yes.
And how much more traffic is on 33rd than 37th?
37th, during the PM peak hour, there's about 45 trips on 37th and about 25 trips on 33rd. So there's a little bit greater traffic on 37th and 33rd.
There's more traffic on 37th
At
than
the
33rd?
our data collection sample locations were at 37th and 58th Avenue and 33rd. And when you look at the eastbound volumes coming to 58th Avenue, there's a slightly greater volume on 37th than on 33rd.
Okay, thank you. That's actually a surprise because I look at the developments that are on 33rd. You got the main entrance of Oak Chase. You got all of Sanctuary. You got the back end of Woodfield. You have all those. And yet on 37th, you only have it. I think even staff alluded to it. You only had a few sort of ranchette type houses. So the fact that you're saying 37th has almost double the traffic.
A little bit.
That
I mean,
33rd has.
It's marginally greater. I mean, when you're talking in terms of during a 1 hour period, 25 trips and 40 trips, that's
Right. No, and that's fine. Whether it's
minor.
20, but the fact that you're actually saying that there's twice the trips on 37th,
yes,
than on 33rd is a surprise.
No, he said that there were 40 trips on 37th and 25 on 33rd during the peak hour. That's not double.
Well, almost double.
It's okay.
So the final question I have is the capacity. Which road has greater capacity?
From a capacity standpoint, I would believe that the county would look at 33rd and 37th being of like capacities. 2-lane, both of them are essentially 2-lane roads. The county would document that they would have 880 trip capacity. Is how the county would define that.
So despite the fact that 37th actually, as the previous speaker had said, that it can be an awful experience trying to make a right if someone's making a left, the fact that 37th actually has a left turn lane, not holding up people making.
There's roadway capacity, and then there's intersection operations.
Okay.
What the condition that the lady was speaking to was intersection operations, and intersection operations are different than just road capacities. Road capacities are merely a function of lane geometry, how many lanes, the distance between signals. That's road capacity.
Okay, so there's the fact that there's a turn lane on 37th that allows people to make a left without holding up people.
That really would have minor impacts or consequence to the capacity of 33rd.
Okay. All right.
It would influence the intersection.
Okay. And so the concern is, and so that actually leads to my final question. You say that you've been told that 33rd is supposed to be improved, and I think Chris Moore confirmed it, and 2015 were
I think he said 2017 is what I think he
2017?
said. And it's to have a north and southbound left turn lane at 33rd and 37th.
And so, and Chris can just yell this answer out. Chris, is that on the, it's on the capital improvement plans?
Chris Mora, Public Works Director. Yes, we have an intersection improvement project in 2017 in our five-year capital improvement program for intersection improvements. Now, at this time, we haven't spelled out exactly what those improvements are going to be, but we anticipate, based on what we've done at other intersections, that there'll be north and southbound left turn lanes, as well as a traffic signal if the warrants are met at that time.
I have a question for you, Mr. Mora.
Yes.
I have heard a concern from the first two people from the public here about the intersections where 37th and 33rd meet 58th. I assume they're legitimate. The one very meaningful thing that is changing in this neighborhood is the vast expansion of 66th, which is the other major thoroughfare that brackets this property. In other words, there's 58th and 66th. I mean, is it 66th? Yeah, it's 66th, correct?
Correct.
66th. And that's going to be maybe 6 months or a year, within a year, that will be fully operational.
Yeah,
Would that change? Is that likely to change the nature of the traffic of the intersections of 58th and 33rd and 58th and 37th in a positive way for these people in this neighborhood? Because it seems to me, and I'm not a traffic engineer, that a lot of traffic's been going down 58th as a consequence of the mess that is 66th right now.
Well, it has, and you're correct, Mr. Chairman. What's happened is with the four-laning on 66 is presently under construction. We've done a lot of construction along 66. We've connected with paving all the way from State Road 60 south to Oslo Road, which is bringing people up from the South County along the 66 corridor instead of 58th. We've got 4 lanes under construction on 66 between State Road 60 to just north of 49th Street. That project is underway and is scheduled to be completed by the end of this year, well, probably more towards the beginning of next year. And then in addition, we had a milling and resurfacing project from 49th Street all the way up to 510, also on 66. So all of those projects in concert have worked over the last year to move traffic away from 66, away from the construction area, onto 58th. Because of that, the intersections along 58th, 33rd, 37th, 41st, 45th, have seen an increase in traffic. And because of that, because of the continuous north-south traffic on 58th, where there used to be more gaps in traffic where people could turn left across that traffic, hasn't been there or hasn't been as plentiful. So what we're seeing is we figure about 30 to 40% of the traffic that's on 58th now will go back and return.
30 to 40%.
We think so, 30, 40%. Now, we can't verify that. We haven't done counts recently, but we think that a great percentage of that traffic is going to shift back to 66 and even have 66 steal some of the traffic that's on 58 because it's going to be a much more viable corridor to use and take traffic north and south from all the way from Sebastian Highlands down to the 60 corridor. That's why we built it, and that's why we've spent the money that we have on 66. We think that that's going to be a reliever, if you will, to 58.
Okay, thank you.
Chris, let me ask you a quick question. How long has the improvements on 33rd Street been on the capital improvement plan? Is it on the 3-year or is it on the 4 or 5 year?
It's in the county has a 5-year capital improvement program. It's scheduled. We have some design money scheduled within the next 2 years, and some construction money scheduled for 2017. Now, we know that we only have 50 feet of right-of-way on 58th Avenue south of 33rd Street and 65 feet north of 33rd Street. You need 80 feet to build a 3-lane section with turn lanes and bike lanes.
Right.
So we know that we're going to have to acquire some right-of-way. That's why we left a year between the design phase and the construction phase so that we could acquire that right-of-way that is missing. We're going to need right-of-way along 58th. We're going to need corner clips at the intersection.
I understand. I understand.
So
the most important thing you've told me is that in your professional judgment, that the intersections of 33rd and 58th and 37th and 58th, which are a legitimate concern from what I hear for these applicants and have been some kind of frustration for them, and they have a further concern with more traffic being there, they have been made worse as a consequence of the expansion of 66. And I heard you say in your professional judgment that it's going to be a 30 to 40% reduction, perhaps. This isn't traffic engineering. This is just your professional judgment. When that opens, which will be, that'd be a big deal.
Well, I would differ with you in terms of worse. Yes, there's more traffic there, but is it unsafe? We don't think so. And we monitor crashes. We monitor accidents. We get all of the crashes from all the police agencies come into our office. We monitor these continuously. The intersection of 33rd and 58th and 37th and 58th have not exhibited a high crash location or a high crash rate, even during these times of traffic moving over to 58 from 66. Even during these times of higher traffic demand, they're not exhibiting a high rate of accidents. So we don't, you say worse, I say heavier traffic,
busier.
But not busier. Definitely busier, but not
busier.
Unsafe.
I understand.
Put it that
Thank
way.
you.
Just a final question. How long has it been on the capital improvement list?
I know we added it within the last 2 years. I recall during November of 13, which is the last update that we took the Board of County Commissioners, it was on there. And I believe we added it within the last year or two. But we knew that these intersection improvements were going to be needed in the near future. So we put it in there with design and construction money, and hopefully we'll get the right-of-way in that same time frame.
Thank you, Mr. Morrow.
As far as traffic, my basic concerns are how long it's going to take to improve the 33rd, 58th. I'm not sure. I can't, have the expertise to argue, but I would ask anyone in the audience who gets up and speaks, or any of you all, if you look at 37th Street and you look at 33rd, the idea that 37th produced not double, but whatever it was, 40% more traffic, given what's on 37th versus what's on 33rd, is completely out of the norm. I mean, you have huge developments on 33rd. You have none of these developments on 37th. Every logical conclusion would say you're going to have more traffic on 33rd and 37th. So, I don't know if they just picked a random day that created this, weird set of numbers, but that just defies logic. But if they're going to improve the intersection, it's on the 5-year. They've got the money. I don't know if they said it's funded, but they got the allocation ready to go. That's fine with me. The other problems, or the other concerns I had, have to do with the specific nature of the property. And I have questions regarding, and I'll try to go quickly. The first question I have, I'll just say what my concerns are. County staff received a ESA. I guess that's an environmental statement of the property. I guess I just learned what ESA is. Does everyone know what ESA is? No. ESA, and someone can please just correct me, I'm trying to go fast, but an ESA is a snapshot of the property, and it's done by the environmental consultant. The environmental consultant says, okay, here's the various type of communities on the property. Here's a specific type of wetland. Here's native upland. So I guess they did one ESA, submitted it. I got it that. Then apparently there was a second because I guess St. John's kicked it back and said, no, we're not going to accept it. You got to redo your wetland delineations. They did a second one. I think they had increased the wetland delineations. All of a sudden, in the second ESA, two new categories appeared on the property. I keep seeing the chairman shake his head. Is there someone? If I'm saying something wrong, you can correct me. But two new categories appeared that were not on the first. One was called Brazilian peppers. The other was called trails, which means that all of a sudden in the second ESA, they said, oh, well, there are trails on the property, so that's not going to go into our calculation for native plant community set-asides. And they've also said, oh, and there's also some Brazilian peppers, and Brazilian peppers don't go in our native plant community set-aside. And that may be fine, but the code specifically says that environmental planning shall conduct an on-site review to verify the ESA information. And my communication with staff, they did not do an on-site valuation to confirm the ESA, and I think that's expressly spelled out in the code, and I don't think they did it, but you can hear from them whether they did or not. The other concern I have is that there was a specific code called 3290.
Let me just stop
Yeah,
right there.
does staff wanna
Is it a
respond?
requirement of the code, and was it conducted?
The portion of the code that George is referring to says the aerial extent of native upland plant communities occurring on site shall be verified by county environmental planning staff based on field inspection and review of a vegetation survey to be submitted. And I'll let Roland, because he and the other environmental planner have been on the site and have looked at aerial photographs. But they did not go on the site, in my understanding, and Roland can verify, they did not go on the site after reviewing the ESA, but they had knowledge of the site
So
prior
they
to.
conducted a field inspection.
Correct. But I'll let
Just for the record, I'm Roland DeBlois, Chief of County Environmental Planning. George is correct, and we explained this to him, that we did not visit the site under the current ESA. County staff had been on the site under previous reviews, so we were generally familiar with the site. What we did in looking at this and getting a confidence level is the previous visit to the site from a past review, also looking at the ESA, discussions with the environmental consultant on questions and discussion on what would be considered native upland plant community for the calculation standpoint. We're also, with the knowledge that St. John's has been out there as other agencies from their own standpoint, albeit for wetland delineation, and that plus high-resolution aerials, everything seemed to line up. Collectively, looking at all the information, we feel confident that the ESA reflects the site condition.
When was the last time you guys made a site visit to that?
It's been at least a year or so.
In your professional opinion, would there be any salient changes between the last time you visited it and now?
No, and the other thing is, site visit just gives you a snapshot of the general conditions. When you have a site of this size, coupled with the resolution and recent aerials, we have a very high resolution. It's almost a better review to look at it in-house through the aerials, react to the delineations and verifications with other agencies, and that's how we looked at it in this case.
Yes.
Let me
please
just
introduce
say,
yourself.
My name is William Kerr. I'm the environmental consultant.
Yes, sir.
I've had my own company for over 30 years, working in Indian River, Central Florida. Served 9 years on St. Johns River Water Management District's governing board. The process that Indian River County goes through is very similar to Martin, St. Lucie, Brevard, Osceola, all those counties. When you do an initial preliminary report, that's then confirmed later by work done on the site. I don't want it to be misconstrued. When we did the first report, looking at the aerials and doing some preliminary soils work, it looked like the wetlands were one way. Because the water table is, in certain times, can be different, then you can have more wetlands or less wetlands. And so when we went back out to do the jurisdictional flagging of the wetland boundaries for the Water Management District, it changed. No big deal. It does all the time. I want to be sure that you all understand that we, as the environmental consultant, changed the wetland lines based on soils, hydrology, and plant types. We had the Water Management District out there to confirm them, and there was a less than 1% change on what they confirmed in the flags. So it's a standard process. Is it done every day? There's nothing unusual about it. And there was a comment made earlier about the rarity of the habitat that this development is being developed on. You can look up U.S. Fish and Wildlife. There's over 1.1 million acres of this particular type of habitat in South Florida. Now, that is from Indian River County down to the Everglades. That's the quickest number I could get, but it is not a rare and endangered habitat.
I do have a question for you. You identified 7 acres as being this.
You're going to have to slow down and speak slowly because I'm as deaf as a post. I got 2 hearing aids and still can't hear.
You identified 7 acres of the property pertaining to this specific code of 3290. And that's FLUCS, right? That's a specific code that the county requires.
That's a flux code.
Flux code. And you identified 7 acres as a 3290, which is defined as other shrubs and brush. Is that correct?
I believe that I haven't looked at the acreages, but if that's what you say it is, that's what it is.
Okay. Is that type of property, is that classification usually consistent with a native plant community classification?
The problem that you have with definitions of native plant communities is that you can have a habitat. In this case, technically it's known as a mesic pine flatwoods. There are places in the mesic pine flatwoods that have more exotic invasive species. And when you have that, it reduces the viability of the habitat to support wildlife, all the way from insects to 4-footed furry animals. And so when you identify areas that are different, and those areas that are different are in Indian River County's code, if they're dominated by vines or dominated by Brazilian pepper or dominated by Australian pine tree, then those areas need to come out of the overall jurisdiction designation of a mesic pine flatwoods.
Okay, so just so I understand correctly, the answer is yes, that type of property is normally classified as a native plant community unless there is something, say, in the county code, such as some type of nuisance that would, because of its invasiveness, would take it out of consideration for being classified as a native plant community.
I am not an expert on Indian River County's code.
Well, you just quoted it. You just said that you looked at the code.
Well, let me speak. We're trying to be nice here, right? I'm still deaf. The Indian River County Code allows land to come out of whatever their upland set-aside is if it's covered by exotic invasive species and such as noxious vines, something that creates a monoculture habitat, which in all wildlife situations is not conducive to a good ecosystem. So, yes, we took those properties out. It is part of the code. That is something that is allowed. I talked to Roland about it. We had a meeting with staff. We discussed it, and everybody was in agreement that we were doing the right thing.
Remind me again, what was the name of the report that you submitted? The name of the report that you submitted is called a what?
I call it a preliminary wetlands and endangered species assessment.
Okay, so that was conducted, and the first. So you did that with, with your degrees and with your experience and all that stuff. The original level of scrutiny was what agency?
Is this a conceptual kind of thing? So when we did
what agency did it get sent to St. John's River Water Management District at that point?
No. It was sent to Brevard, to Indian River County.
Okay.
Then the wetlands have to be identified. We got to know how many wetlands are for both state and federal permitting.
Right.
So the next level after you do your preliminary is an actual wetland.
So first it goes to the county. The county looks it over. They scrutinize it. Maybe they come back to you with a few comments, and then once that's all signed off by the county, then it goes to whom?
Well, they sort of run parallel tracks.
Okay, so who's the other agency?
Who's the
other agency?
I'm sorry?
Who's the other agency that's reviewing?
St. John's River Water Management.
St. John's River Water Management District. In this instance, their scientists reviewed the report. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And they came back and they said, we're not completely happy with some of your findings here. We want you to take another look at the wetlands or something like that.
No,
it was sent back to you with comments. It was not. It was accepted the first time.
We did the wetland flagging, and there was less than 1% difference between our wetland flagging and what the Water Management District approved. We made the change based on on-the-ground situations from the preliminary report to the wetland.
But the county has approved your report.
Yes.
St. Johns River, the state has approved, well, it's not the state, it's St. Johns River Water Management District.
They're agency of the state.
Anybody else?
Not currently.
Were there any deviations from any of the standards of norms, either in your report, in the way you do it as an environmental scientist, in the way the county reviewed it, or in the way St. Johns River Water Management District commented or reviewed or approved it?
No, sir. And in addition to that, there's off-site mitigation been mentioned. It's all going to be within the same surface water basin. It's all going to be the same nesting zones of the wood stork. So all those protections afforded are going to be complied with.
Did you ask for any relief from any rule or regulation whatsoever in asking for your report to be accepted by either the county or the St. Johns River Water? No deviations?
No deviations.
Okay, so if I can get back to my point, I would like to go ahead and state that you're absolutely correct, that there are types of nuisances that would make the property transfer from something of a native plant community to a non-native because of its presence. And the point I was getting to is that's actually spelled out in the code. We don't have to speculate. We don't have to have meetings where staff decides, you know, do we think it should be this way or not. Section 92905, subsection 4C, and it lists out what type of exotics, if there are present, that would no longer classify that property for native plant communities. They're Australian pine, earpod tree, China berry, Brazilian pepper, melaleuca. It goes further on to just pull out from native plant community classifications wetlands or deep water habitat. It then also goes on to pull out native plant community classifications, areas that have been disturbed from previous development or land clearing activities within the past 2 years. So the point that I'm getting to is that they have 7 acres of land that they've classified as this code 3290. It's other shrubs and brush. It falls under rangeland. It normally is classified as native plant communities. And they're saying, well, because there's some vines there, it's not native plant community pursuant to your code. What I'm arguing is the code says what type of exotics would take that classification away. Vines is not one of them.
And I can address that from a staff perspective and how we accepted the vine coverage as lessening out from the native upland for the initial area for calculation. The section that George is referencing says, in fact, the areas he referenced are not included in the calculation. Staff's perspective, and as we've enforced this and applied it since it's been in effect since 1990, is that's not an exclusive list. It is a list of things that certainly will be left out, but there can be other areas that are disturbed that should not be included. There are other locations in the code that make reference.
And that's been consistent with its past practice?
This is consistent.
Okay.
And there's some key language within the code at different locations. Particularly, it references that the intent and the reference to areas to be preserved are areas that are in viable condition with intact canopy, understory, and ground cover. So in looking at the full context of it, that list that George referenced, that section clearly pulls out areas that you would expect, like Brazilian pepper and such. But there's also staff supplied, so if there's disturbed areas covered in vines, it doesn't meet the full cross-section. It's not a viable community that's warrant preservation, and therefore it's not included in the calculation. And that's consistent, and that's how that vine-covered area that George is alluding to got accepted as an area that would not be included in the calculation.
Thank you.
And if I can make reference to the location of the terminology, but it is in the code.
And that's fine. You know, we have a dispute on interpretation. You can have your lawyers evaluate that. My point being that simply saying, well, this is the way we've always done it, actually does not satisfy legal requirements. You got to follow the code. And so I say that there you have 7 acres of this classification that is normally considered native plant communities. They're saying, well, there's some vines there, so we're going to pull it out. And I'm saying, well, wait a minute. The code actually provides the list of various plants or nuisance plants that if it's on this type of property, yes, then you pull it out, but vines are not on the list. And then so the final point I have is the way they calculate their 15% set aside. And for the record, everything I've said right now, I've emailed in detail to staff. They're fully aware of every position I'm raising. I gave the applicant every position I'm raising now. I've let everyone know, my concerns. The final deals with the 15% set aside. The code requires that you have to set aside 15% of your native plant communities, and it talks about preservation. And so when I asked staff, are they preserving 15% of their native plant communities, or are they preserving less? The answer I got is, well, they're preserving less, but they're going to restore areas on the property that are not classified as native plant communities, but they're going to restore those properties, and then they're going to count those restored properties as part of the 15% set aside. And my position is that the code is actually pretty specific that that's not permitted, that you are allowed to restore lands to count towards that 15%, but only if you make a finding that if you actually go out there and preserve 15%, that would create a hardship that would preclude reasonable use of the property by the developer. So like just as a quick example, say you have a 100-acre piece of property. 50 acres is native plant communities, 50 acres is not. Pursuant to the just clear language of the code, 15% of the 50 acres would be 7.5 acres. So the way I think the code would read is you have to set aside 7.5 acres of the native plant communities pursuant to the code. If you want to go to the point where you say you bulldoze past that and say you only preserve 5 acres and then you're going to go into the other 50 acres that's not native plant communities, you can go ahead and, staff saying you can go ahead and preserve 2.5 acres there so you get to cumulatively 7.5. But my position is when you read the code says that you can do that only if there's a finding, only if there's a demonstration by the applicant and a finding by staff that the strict 15% set aside would preclude reasonable use of the property. And so that hasn't been found. And, staff, obviously you're going to hear what they have to say about this, but I think they need to set aside 15% of the native space. I don't think they should be allowed to take land that's not considered native plant communities, restore it, and say, well, there's our 15%. And does that make sense for, okay.
Okay.
So,
go ahead, sorry.
Does staff want to respond to that on the reallocation of the 16.2%, and then also the hardship argument that was presented?
And let me, for the benefit of the audience here, let me read what it says in the staff report. You guys may not have a copy of this, so that they can better answer the question that Brad has. It says, Uplands, since the site is over 5 acres in size, exactly what you said, the native upland set-aside requirement of the Land Development Regulations, Section 929.05 applies. Native upland communities cover 92.05 acres of the 120.1 acre overall site, or 77% of the total site, and the applicant is preserving 14.93 acres, or 16.2% of the uplands. This exceeds the 15% minimum upland set-aside requirement. An easement will be established prior to or via the final plat for each respective phase. So obviously there's a discrepancy between what he said and what is in the staff report. So Mr. Emmons had a great question. Can you reconcile this for us?
Well, there's 3 categories to meet the 15%. There's on-site within the project. There's off-site protection or creation, and then the third and last alternative is a fee in lieu of preservation, either on-site or off-site. Those are the 3 categories. In this case, the preservation is on-site for the upland, everything. It's not off-site, so it's all in the first tier. So the second tier is if you can't reasonably account for it on-site, you can do it off-site. Again, the third one, if you can't do it on-site, you can't find a reasonable place to do it off-site, there's an opportunity for a fee in lieu. Since this is all on-site, we consider it in the first category. There is reference to on-site preservation or creation as the first tier. So it's all within that first tier. I think what George is alluding to, again, that there's a few patches within the proposed set-aside buffers that have exotic encroachment. And the issue that George is raising is that we're allowing those to be restored in the context of the bigger reserved area and to count as credit. We think it meets the requirement.
The landscape buffers, which are going between the properties, I asked a question about that before, are largely going to be created through the preservation of the existing native habitat. Does that count towards this 15%?
Yes, it does.
It does, okay.
And that is allowed in the code.
Okay. Is that adequately?
No, because I just want to, we can have a disagreement, that's fine, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page why we're disagreeing.
But you understand what he said?
And I disagree, and that's
Okay.
why I just want to clarify. He says there's 3 options, and there are 3 options, but it's not like you just get to pick and choose from the 3 options. It's not like a value meal menu at McDonald's. It's you do option 1, which is you preserve 15% of actual native plant communities. If that can't be done in that, and here's the legal buzzwords, if you can't do that without that action deprives the owner of reasonable use of his property, then you can fall back into these other 2 options of you can actually even pay into the county, and that can be an option.
But he's stating that satisfies that number 1 condition.
Right, but there's a distinction between the code says you have to set aside 15% of native plant communities. It doesn't say you can take something that's not native plant, and this actually is explained in the code. What Roland, and this is where the discrepancy is, Roland is saying I can take a piece of property, I can take a section of that buffer that's currently, according to their ESA, it's not native upland habitat. That's their own documents. He's saying we can go in and they can, take out all the Brazilian peppers, they can plant oaks, they can plant scrubs, and they can turn that into a native plant community. The difference is between preservation and restoration. Those are 2 different activities. If you preserve something, you're preserving it from destruction. If you're restoring it, you're taking something that is not natural and you are turning it into a native plant community. And so that's the distinction, and the code's actually pretty clear that those are 2 different
Yeah,
items.
but when we're talking about, there's a bunch of trees that we want to keep, and there's a bunch of non-native species that we don't want. So we're going to take out the non-native species, keep the good stuff, maybe enhance it up to the level of a type B buffer for the benefit of the community and their neighbors. I mean, that's not exactly the same thing as bulldozing all the native habitat. We want to take, don't we want to take the non-native species out of those areas? Isn't that a goal of the state of Florida and Indian River County, is to take the peppers and the vines? I mean, these people don't want to look at vines and things and Brazilian peppers and stuff in their backyard. I mean, we're going to keep the good stuff and get rid of the bad stuff. And you're saying that that's non-native, that we should keep, in order for it to, is what you're saying, in order for it to be native, it has to have the good stuff and the bad stuff in it together?
No, what I'm saying is that if I'm reading their ESA, the applicant's ESA, an applicant says...
But the practical effect of what you're saying is that...
it's not what you're describing. The applicant says, this piece of property here, it's just Brazilian peppers. It's not natural, it's not going to get counted as part of being the overall native. So it's sort of like having their cake and eating it too. They're saying, that's not natural, it's not going to get counted. Oh, by the way, we're going to go ahead and take out the peppers and we're going to restore it because we need that property to get above the 15% mark. And the code says, and I think this is a completely different situation, the code says we want to preserve.
So would your remedy be then for them to have these buffers the way they proposed and then an additional 15%?
I'm saying all they have to do is just go onto their ESA, take out, find out wherever they said is a non-native community that they are counting towards their native set-aside, and they have to take that out. And so, I mean, we may only be talking about like an acre or acre and a half, but the fact is the code's specific on the issue of you have to set aside native land. You can't take non-native land and sit there and say, well, we're going to call it native because we're going to do restoration work. It does say that you can do that only upon...
So your desire is in this development plan, in this PD, is for them to carve an acre out and leave it exactly in its natural condition. That's what you're looking for? Is that what you're asking the Planning and Zoning Commission to require of the developer? I want to know what it is you
I'm asking, it's very simple. I'm just asking planning and planning staff to follow the code and to set aside native plant communities to the tune of 15% of whatever the number is, and not go ahead and not taking land that's not identified as native plant communities and saying we're going to allow them to count towards that 15%. Is that, if I'm not making myself clear, I apologize.
So you're trying to say if they can't do the 15% up, then they shouldn't be able to do the development. Is that what you're trying to get to?
No, I'm saying that the code says you do 15%.
Right.
And if you can't do 15%, you can check down to these two options. You can pay money into an account or you can restore. But you have to have a finding that's almost a necessity because of a hardship, that the developer can't get reasonable use of his property by strict adherence to the 15%. And then, of course, my previous comments that you have the 7 acres of this range land that has some vines. They're saying it's not native. I think that 7 acres should be included in the calculation. 15% of 7 acres would be another, I don't know.
Do you think that this PD, this design that they've showed us with the architecture and the layout and the way their entrance and their gates and everything else, do you think that it would be if you were to prevail upon us and the county attorney and all of these people that the 15%, the way you interpret it, is in fact the correct thing and the county has gone against its own code, and as a consequence of that there was an extra acre or so, is what you said, of native upland set aside, do you think that would be a big enough improvement? Is that what you need in order to be happy? I mean, is that the improvement you're looking for that's going to take this from being an unacceptable development to an acceptable development?
You know what? I'm not even going to play these types. I'm just going to say if you follow the code, that's probably where you'll end up. But I'm just going to simply say, here's the provisions of the code. Here's what it requires. If you follow it.
What we're a little bit accustomed to is people coming in and saying, you know what, my neighbor has this big light on the corner of his property and, he wants to redevelop it. If that light just wasn't on my thing, that would make me okay. Then I'd be okay with what he's doing. Right. And I'm trying to get out of you, what would make you okay? I understand what your interpretation, I really do understand what it is that you have objected to. What you haven't told me is what would make you happy. Is what remedy you are looking for from the developer and his representative and his environmental engineer and his civil engineer that would satisfy you as to and
I understand that, but one at the very beginning, I'm trying to lay out legal arguments. I'm trying to present code. I don't want to sit there and say, well, I don't like the way it looks, and therefore I think you should change it, because I know that's not going to fly. So in this specific instance, if you want to know what I'm saying, I'm saying that there's 7 acres that they should include as part of the native upland habitat, and that when they go ahead and calculate the 15% of the set-aside that's required by the code, that it's got to be 15%. That's it.
I do truly understand exactly what you said to me. I understand the nature of the thing. I know there's other people who would like to speak tonight, so we've gone through some of these technical things. So I'm going to invite other people to please come up and speak. Thank you. Thank you very much. Anybody else who would like to speak tonight, please feel free to come up. Just remember to state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Jim Davis. My address is 775 Broadway Street, City of Vero Beach, and I'm a volunteer for the Breath of Heaven Ministries, which owns one of the small out parcels that fronts 37th Street. That property has quite a history, but I won't go through all that history. But we have a few concerns, one of which is traffic. The entrance on 37th Street is shown to the west, which will affect a much longer section of 37th Street, particularly with the construction traffic. We're talking about 300 homes. Who knows how many concrete trucks, fill trucks? I don't know if they're balancing cut and fill on the site. Probably are. But we have a tremendous concern with that traffic. Going
you mean
through
coming
the
off
whole
of 58th up to 37th and that entrance, coming that way, traveling west off of 58th?
That's right.
Okay.
And the traffic plans showed an eastbound left turn lane. I believe that was incorrect. I believe that was supposed to be a westbound left turn lane on 37th to serve the western 37th Street driveway. And I know that that's a very difficult right-of-way situation there. It's going to be very difficult to acquire that right-of-way from the property owners. And I assume that left turn lane westbound will be built as the construction traffic is using it, probably early in the project. Because our concern on traffic is simply that the Breath of Heaven's property, which is about 2.5 acres, will capture all of that construction traffic going by the property. And this property was intended for a little more intensive use, but due to some neighborhood concerns, they backed down the use to a very quiet development for women that are struggling. And we just have a concern with all that construction traffic being sent down 37th. And one of the property owners had a concern earlier about the left turns onto Kings Highway. That'd be eastbound on 37th, turning north onto Kings. All that construction traffic, concrete trucks, will all have to turn left onto Kings Highway there through the course of the 4 phases.
Why not 66th, when 66th is complete?
Well, that's a very circuitous route to go from the concrete plants on 53rd. Most of all the concrete trucks, Russell's, Rinker, all those trucks are to the east, those concrete plants. So, you know, we do have a concern with construction traffic. We'd like a little clarification on the buffer on the west side of the Breath of Heaven's property. I'm not clear how wide that buffer is, John. Can you explain how wide that is? That a 50-foot buffer?
Yes, let me actually put a slide up and talk through it so I can show it. And this is the buffering plan, and the concern is on the west side. And let me just go around the whole project. On the west side, it's going to taper. It's going to taper down to the smallest point. It's going to be 25 feet, but for a large portion, it will be much greater than 25 feet as you go through this triangular portion here. This portion at the very southern end of the Breath of Heaven property will be 25. This will be wider, and then the east side will be wider. And again, this will all remain undeveloped through this portion and provide some compatibility both at the south end and the east end. On the west end, this large triangular area will again taper down at the very southern end to 25 feet. And this will be this section from this point to this point will be the narrowest portion of the buffer, which will be 25 feet.
John,
Okay.
John, that L-shaped parcel of property to the east of Breath of Heaven, that's all owned by the developer,
This
correct?
L shape is owned by the developer and going
Okay.
to remain undeveloped. Will not be developed as part of this, so it will.
And how wide is that?
I'm not sure of the exact dimensions on that parcel,
It
but I can
looks
get
like
that for
more
you.
than 50 feet, though,
It
from the
does.
graphic. And
Correct.
that'll be
This-
native, will it be enhanced with additional vegetation if necessary? Exotics in there?
If there's exotics in there and they're removed, yes, it'll have to meet the type B buffer criteria and again be native material. And to give you a feel for scale, this is a 55-foot width along the sanctuary, and a 50-foot width. So that's just a feeling for scale at that level.
If that small area that's 25 could be expanded to 50, the property owner would prefer that.
Jim, just to let you know that that's 100 feet over there on that section we were just talking about, and that is the section that's going to remain as natural except for the exotics in there. And just for the sake of the P&Z board, we've called the Breath of Heaven 22 times. We have dropped off not once but twice information. We have had meetings with the sanctuary at their clubhouse. They were very gracious. We have met with the people at Shadowbrook. We have met with people up and down 33rd. We have had extensive meetings because we're about being a good neighbor. You know me, been around this community a long time. We've done a lot of great developments. You know Toby Hill. We're not about doing it half-ass. It's going to be done right. And what we've tried to do with this is be the good neighbors, and what we're doing is complying with the county code in the surrounding situation. If that graphic was put back up, you could see how we didn't square the lots off. We rounded the corners. We did that to actually give the Breath of Heaven more land in there than we could have if we had squared our lots off. But what we tried to do was be just that, a good neighbor with them. And Jim, if you'd give me a ring, we'll sit and talk. Okay. I'm not about, and we've tried to reach out to you guys.
All right. Well, Gay King, the president's in the audience with her husband, Tom, and there have been some health concerns in the family. So.
Well, and if I'd known you'd been involved, we'd have gotten up with you.
All right. Well, these are our concerns. We'd like to put them on the record. We have a couple smaller other concerns. We certainly don't want all the phases clear cut. When they go in to do phase one, they work phase one, leave the rest phase 2, 3, and 4 native and undisturbed. We do prefer any reduction in lot width, any 50-foot lots, that they be away from the perimeter of Breath of Heaven's property. And maybe you could concentrate those smaller lots elsewhere in the development except on the western property line of Breath of Heaven's 2 acres. We do think that that left turn lane, I believe it's supposed to be a westbound left turn instead of an eastbound on your graphic, on 37th, serving that western entrance, that be shifted further east on the property and move that entrance further to the east so all that traffic doesn't impact the Breath of Heaven property. And that's basically our concerns.
As a practical matter, can the clearing be done in phases, or because of the water system and the retention that needs to be put in, can it be done in phases? I mean, you're not going to...
Yes, it would be done in phases.
It'll be done in phases.
Correct.
Okay, so you'll clear phase 1 when you're building phase 1, and phase 2 will still be treed.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Would you be willing to make that a condition of the approval?
Sure. And our vision actually is, even within the phase 1 on the individual lots, that we would leave them as natural vegetation. Now, there's some county code to that, but our site balanced itself out so that the need to bring fill dirt in will not happen, and we will gladly, to the concrete companies or any of the heavy equipment guys, let them know that they need to access the property from 66 as well.
That's great.
Mr. Meckling, as far as you're still going to have to build some roads from 37th down to phase 1.
Yes, sir.
And that'll be part of the land clearing that will go on. So you don't want to limit yourself to
Well,
no land clearing on the other
Well,
phases.
correct. I mean, outside of the road system.
I understand. So he's offered to make as a condition of the development that the concrete trucks would access off of 66th, and that the clearing would happen in phases, but not so much, you understand what his limitation is on that.
Well, it would still make sense to move that 37th Street connection to the east of Breath of Heaven's property, because that's going to mean a shorter travel time on 37th. It'll impact less property owners along 37th, be closer to Kings Highway. It just makes more common sense to do that. I know there's going to be a right-of-way issue acquiring right-of-way for that turn lane.
Okay. I understand your concern. Yeah, thank you. We're going to take about a 5-minute break. 5 minutes, you're right back here, just like that.
I only have 3 articles, but go ahead.
Oh, just give us 5 minutes. Okay, thank you. We're just going to adjourn for 5. Thanks, guys. All right, our brief. Oh, I'm sorry. We're waiting for the. Take your time. Okay, we're back in session.
My name is George Moore. I'm at 6285 33rd Manor in the sanctuary. I would address this to Chuck because he's very sharp on the dates and the things. The groundbreaking is when?
We'll see if we get approved tonight. We would like to break ground as soon as possible after tonight. Take it that we get past this. We will go to County Commission in approximately 4 weeks, and then after that we'll wind up getting our final clearances, because we're going to have the St. John's and the Fish and Wildlife and the different things of that nature. But we would expect to hopefully have that within a few weeks after that, as we're working on our wetland mitigation plan right now.
And your first house is expected when?
We would hope to have models done March.
March, okay. And the other thing is the starting price on the big house, the biggest house you got.
Well, the final prices haven't been set yet, so I don't know exactly on the biggest house, as that would be with the builder program. But we're hoping to bring on a varied price point, that the villa product would be somewhere in the under the $200,000 mark, and then homes might be as much as the $350,000 mark, just depending on finishes that a customer might want to put inside the product.
Okay, and your finishing date, do you think on the project is 2 years? How long do you think completion?
Probably about 7 years.
Oh, this is a 7-year project.
6, 7 years, but
okay.
If you buy a house, sir, we'll get one step closer.
Well, that's not out of the question. You folks are very professional. You're doing a very professional job. Some things you can't control, and many of the people understand that. I think that you're being as compliant as possible. The only thing that I look at when I'm looking at the total picture, there's so many projects going on up 58th Street and around the area that I commend you for picking this property, because this is a prime property. It's been empty for so long, we're spoiled.
Well, and we think that it's going to be an asset to that general geographic area. It will certainly help property values around there, and you can be assured that we will be a good neighbor.
Well, that's what I want to hear. Thank you.
Thank you.
Steve Kovaleski, 6310 37th Street. I want to know if the developer would consider moving the construction trucks to using either one or the other, 58th or 37th. I travel down that road every day, and I do think it's a great community. I like the community. I have no objection with it. But when you pull up on 58th to turn right and a car pulls up left of you, you can't make that turn because you can't see the oncoming traffic.
Take me through that again. When you're traveling north on 58th?
No, if you go on 37th Street.
Okay.
And you go to turn on to 58th.
Traveling southbound.
Traveling southbound.
Okay.
I do that 4 times a day.
Right.
When you pull up to that light, or up to the stop sign,
yeah.
If someone pulls up there to turn left, you cannot make the right turn because you can't see left, and traffic coming from 41st, 45th heading south, so you have to wait for traffic in the left lane to turn.
Well, let me ask you a question. Would you be happier if they said that all of their construction traffic would come off of 66?
Absolutely, sure. I was actually happy to hear that it is in the works, because we've called down there and tried to make it known that something needs to be done there before.
Well, you know, if you look at the right-of-way acquisition that they're donating to the county, it includes a carve-out on that exact corner. So I guess they probably have listened to you, because when I look at this map, and you want to pull that up so you can show them, when I look at this map, it looks like the entire right-of-way acquisition is, I don't know what it is, but right up at that exact corner you're talking about where you've got a blind, yeah, see that?
Yep.
That's part of what the developer is giving the county.
Yeah,
but you're going to make it a condition you're going to make all you're going to knock heads and make sure all those guys come up with 66. Right?
Yes, sir. We'll direct our construction that direction.
Okay.
Right on.
And if you're having all those activities at the clubhouse, will you let residents in under 55?
We'll give you a ring.
Bring your own beer.
Mr. Chairman, are we going to have to add that to an amended motion when we get there?
I think so, yeah.
Do you have a list going of?
Well, the only two I have so far are clearing in phases with reasonable accommodation and traffic off of 66th. But I can't make a motion. Anyone else would like to speak this evening? Yes, sir.
Good evening. Jeff Thompson, 2327 Seville Avenue, Vero Beach. Well, you know, we all came from somewhere. Every one of us live in a subdivision somewhere usually, and it probably came through this board one way or the other. So, you know, there's opportunities out there, and these people have taken an opportunity to do a quality project. If anybody has known the developments that Chuck Meckling has been involved in, either on the barrier island or on the mainland side, I can assure you it's going to be done right. And to the gentleman sitting here on the corner here, the Gator fan, I tell you, if anybody has ever been into one of Toby Hill's hazards or worked for Toby Hill, he's not only going to know his job, he's going to know everybody's job on that site, and you better do it to his expectations, because there is no stone left unturned in regards to the quality and the attention to detail. You know, I'd be curious as if the county's donating any money to this group, you know, to handle the drainage off of 58th and 33rd Street on their expansion project, because, you know, it sounds like they're doing the county a heck of a job by taking on this extra water, you know, for drainage on the expansion of the county-owned roads. Certainly, a 55-plus community has got to be an asset. I mean, Vero Beach, what a great place to live. We all know it. We all live in paradise, and we certainly don't want to put any barriers up for other people to come into this community. I think there's an opportunity here to build something, to do something that's right for this community, and there's no doubt in my mind that this community will be done right. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you very much for your comments. Good evening. Welcome.
Hello. My name's Juliana Young. I live at 5865 34th Lane. That's in Shadowbrook. We built our house there in 1974. I think we are the longest-lived neighbor of this project. I can't tell you how pleased that we are, my husband and I, about this project and the nature of it, and how the buffer, which goes way beyond the code, allows us to maintain our acre lot next to a smaller lot development and still maintain this ambiance feeling of openness, open space. And I also can't tell you how glad I am to see this property be developed, because we have lived there over the years when there have been numerous fires on that piece of property. And I can't imagine that some of the areas of nativeness of that property haven't been significantly disturbed by the immense fires that have been on that property. We have packed up our belongings more than once to have to move out in a hurry. I think this is going to be a big asset to the neighborhood. The method that is planned for this development is sound. It's sound for the adjacent neighborhoods that are extremely different from this type of development. I think it's going to work very well, and I can't tell you how pleased I am that this board is not allowing something to go in there like Carriage Lane. You know, two-story monstrosities sitting out in the middle of nowhere. This is going to be an asset to our neighborhood and to our community, and I am all for it. And so if you're wondering what an immediate neighbor thinks about it, because my property backs to this property, I'm really pleased to see the plans. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Anyone else? Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Terry Ross. I'm with Breath of Heaven, and I really didn't come here to talk about what I'm going to talk about. But as I've seen things progressing on here, I've seen something that I might bring to somebody's attention that might be interested in it. Is the lands that has been happening in Vero Beach is we've had a lot of land being pushed up around here, and a lot of wildlife run out, and a lot of trees broke down, and just a lot of destruction, and the place goes out of business. And there's it leaves wasteland. Looks like the old, what you might call the ruins of the old Roman Empire, sitting out here in different places in Indian River County. And I like to see things like this. I mean, I like to see development. I like to see new buildings and new structures coming up. It looks nice and all, and it is an asset. But the thing that is, I was kind of wondering if these people, instead of pushing up new places like this, if they could go ahead and buy out some of these people that have already pushed them up, and we could have a community out there where it's already been nominated in and everything's been taken care of. What we're doing now, we're just making more wasteland. We're, even with the houses and so on there, we're going to be dumping fertilizer on it. We're going to be, having concrete out there. It's going to be flowing into the storm drains right out into our river, into the lagoon, where we're having problems with now. And I don't know, that's just a suggestion. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Anyone else before I close the public hearing? Going once, going twice? Public hearing is closed. Any commissioners have any comments? Questions? Suggestions, recommendations, motions?
I'd like to make a motion to approve with 2 conditions. The first condition would be that all construction traffic will use 66th. The second is clearing will only be permitted in active areas with reasonable accommodations.
That was Mr. Bragnano that made that motion.
I'll second it.
Mr. Emmons made the second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? There are no opposition. The motion passes. Item number 5, commissioners' matters. Do any commissioners have any matters that they would like to bring before the board? No. Item number 6, planning matters.
Mr. Chairman, the only item that we will be having our next meeting on September 11th, we do have one public hearing for that.
Okay. Mr. DeBrawl, anything this evening?
No, sir.
We're adjourned.